Cheers, buddy. Right, good morning, everyone. How are we? Yeah, we've all got our coffee. We're all hydrated, ready to go. Yeah, great. So, before I talk about standard operating procedures and how we look to try and automate it and the things that we can do, I first want us to look at that picture of me, and not because I want everybody to look at a picture of me, but I've been AI'd, basically. So if you look at that photograph, if you look at that wrist and fist, it isn't mine. So every time I look at it, I think, and I showed my children this, I look a little bit like Wreck-It Ralph with the slightly bigger hand than belongs to me. Yeah. So it looks slightly strange. So anyway, Anant talked a little bit about this in the opening speech, just in terms of standard operating procedures and why we have them. And if you think about it, there's a lot of really good reasons why any organization creates a SOP document. Just show of hands, who either creates, looks at, maintains, manages SOP documents? Yeah, quite a few of you, right? And when I sort of look at the reasons why, there are lots of decent reasons like efficiency, training, consistency. And so we all think that by putting that into a document, that of course that means, of course, we all understand it. That's the institutional knowledge, right? And to some extent, that's true, right? It certainly helps. But we all know that those documents change over time. They get out of date. People forget to review them. If you're bringing on a new AP clerk, you've got to enable them to make sure that they understand all the procedures and the steps. That can be really, really time-consuming. And last week, I was in Frankfurt, given actually a very similar presentation. And before me, there was an individual called Andy that presented from Reckitt Benckiser. And his business had grown really by acquisition, right? By different brands, different companies. And of course, their approach to a SOP is, well, we have different companies that we've amalgamated. The complexity is immense. So how can we actually look to try to I guess, streamline that? So we all know we have SOPs, we don't like them, they're a necessary evil. But how can we look to try to streamline some of that using AppZen? So again, this is an actual real example. So assumably you've all got a T&E document, right, policy, correct? Maybe? Yep. And so you have a look at this and you start to understand, okay, well, if I'm using an EMS system, right, or I'm using AppZen, there may be some things that actually live outside of those tools today, right, that haven't been automated, haven't been embedded, so you have to write the rules somewhere. And of course, you have a T&E document, that stuff is outside of maybe your EMS system, and so skip. And so how do we look to actually change that? So in this particular example here, you have a trigger that we'll talk about in a little while. We have a check, and then we have an act. So in this particular example, you have internal audit. We'll select expense reports for audits based off statistical guidelines. So then what do we need to check? Well, we need to check the following, and then based off that, we need to act, we need to do something. And if I pack that down some more, you have a trigger, check, decide, and act. Therefore, how much can we look at that SOP document and start to think about it in terms of how do we embed that into AppZen for sort of further automation? And again, when I look at it here, that's breaking out a lot of logical steps. Now, of course, that's great here on a flow diagram, but actually, how do you incorporate that into AppZen? You've heard a lot about Mastermind. You've heard a lot about DIY apps today. If you're interested in this and want to see the practical application, actually see what the screens are going to look like, I would go to our team session, which is next in this room over here. So he's got some real life examples where he's going to show you the screens. But effectively, if you start to look through your documents, start to look for efficiencies, start to look for user cases, and then breaking it down, We're going to give you a platform that's going to allow you actually to start to embed that into AppZen. Other examples here, missing receipts, for example. If I have it in my document that says, hey, if somebody submits receipts without, submits expenses without receipts, and I have missing affidavits up to 10 times, action should be to reject. Now, how good would that be to actually be able to build those auto rules into AppZen without coming to us, without coming to the App Store, where you can build that logic in, so that you're then looking to, again, drive automation. Now, one of the things that somebody said to me in Frankfurt was, and they were an expense customer, they said, hey, look, you've mentioned a lot of the capabilities that are on AP. What about expense? But one of the key things that AppZen's doing is when we're building something out for AP, that same logic, that same structure also really relates to expense. So you'll see that a lot of time when we develop something first on expense, it will be then put into AP and vice versa. And you've probably saw some of those, some of those things with Gen AI as well. Hotel bills. So for example, are there personal expenses on that bill? Would you want to auto reject? Okay. So again, that's probably in a policy somewhere. Would you want to auto reject? What's the next trigger and action that you would want to take? Okay. On AP, again, if you look at this, there's a lot of information in here. So here you can see, okay, you've got to check the description. You have to have a look at the invoice. It's got to be clear. And then you have a bunch of different actions. Here you can see, if you can't see it in Oracle or R12, you must ask for a supplier to do X, Y, Z. Again, super, super time consuming, because by the time you've gone to those two systems, written up an email, that's probably going to take you 45 minutes, right? So what we're looking to try to do here, again, is to add more information in here so we can actually start to track and action it. So if you look, okay, this is for utilities, subscriptions, communication, internet, rent, and others. So if we have the ability to build in that logic and then trigger off a response, what would be the impacts? Again, this is how we would break it down. So, and we're going to spend a lot more time, certainly in our team session, breaking some of this down a little bit more. But you're looking at the trigger, you're looking at the check, you're looking at the action, and that's how we're looking to automate. So we're trying to break down every solitary step within that standard operation procedure document so that we can trigger further automation. Okay. So I guess you saw from Kunal's presentation, DIY app, and you saw the logic where it's like, if then do this. What we're doing in the background, and I think it's something that's really, really critical, is behind the scenes, we're building an AI model, right? So I, as a business user, well, actually, hands up, who knows Python coding? I'm keeping my hand down because I don't, right? I don't know Python coding. I wasn't a good coder at university. In fact, I nearly failed my module on that. But effectively what we're giving you here is the ability to build AI apps without really being an AI expert, right? You're a business expert. So having those screens, they give you the ability to kind of trigger responses and call different AI models, means really what we're doing is we're amplifying your ability to almost be a coder, but without the IT debt that goes alongside that. Just by show of hands again, who's using Concur today? Or an EMS system, yeah? So do you guys today build rules in Concur? Yeah? Yeah, few. So imagine if you can do that kind of concept, but with AppZen for a process that's in your SOP document that you go, I want to drive further automation, and I don't necessarily have to. You might love your CSM, you might love logging tickets at AppZen, you might like talking to your AI your AE, but imagine if you can just cut all of that out and you just say, okay, I'm going to build this. I'm going to use the Mastermind DIY engine to create these particular kind of models. And then I'm going to implement it, and I might want to test it, right? So again, you might want to have a look at it and see what the impact of that automation or those AI engine, what it will be on your transactions, and you're going to be able to do that, okay? And I think that's where certainly the audience in Frankfurt were really excited because, of course, AppZen's trying to take away a lot of the low-level, like high-volume kind of work. So how do you then actually, keep adding additional value to the business, right? And a lot of our organizations, certainly in Frankfurt, were very excited about the ability for that level of configuration, right? But without having to go back to AppZen directly. And there are lots of different user cases, and I think that's one of the key things is that we're trying to look at it in terms of a platform. So when you see the AP enhancements or expense enhancements, it's really all about how do we make sure that across that entire platform that we give you the tools and the ability to create the rules. And this is really sort of showing that in a bit more information. So same with Inbox, same concept, right? How do we make it into a driven user interface that's friendly so you can start to create the rules? And so a W9, you guys have W9s here. So how do we actually trigger, based on the W9 that comes in, what's the actions and tasks? If you don't have a W9 set up, instead of actually having to manually write an email to say, hey, can you send me X, Y, Z? We can look to automate that automatically. And it's the same user case. If you start to think about that for AP or expense, you might have incoming queries in expense that say something on the lines of, hey, why haven't I been paid? Why did that expense get rejected? And so having the ability to kind of build that logic into here, or the kind of response that you would want, again, is like pretty powerful in terms of automation. So of course, there's lots of challenges with SOPs. There's lots of reasons why people want to look to automate. Most organizations that I talk to certainly aren't saying, hey, yeah, we've got additional headcount this year for AP. What they're really saying is the opposite. We have to stay the same, but we've actually got more workload coming through. So we know that change is important. And so again, from AppZen's perspective with Mastermind, it's really trying to give our customers the power to do that automation, to build AI rules without the interaction of AppZen, right? We want to be able to give it to business users. And of course, I had a really good question in Frankfurt, which was, will there be a log file? Will we understand who's created what? How do we make sure that, there's like version control and that you just don't build anything that you want? And of course, we've thought about all of that. But it really is kind of like a very useful way to look at the SOP for the first time and try to drive out in inefficiencies. And I think it would be disingenuous if I said, the SOP's never going to exist. We don't have to worry about it ever again. It will always exist, but it's about sort of reducing that and making it a lot easier. So just sort of 20 minutes of just very sort of quick discussions in terms of SOPs. Are there any questions in terms of what I've covered today or from the previous meetings earlier today? Yeah.
To go back to what you talked about earlier with the receipt updated tracker, is that a module that's separate?
Yes, a good question. So you said you're using Concur today. So Concur today has that capability of a receipt affidavits in it, right? So if you're missing a receipt, instead of taking a photograph and saying missing receipt, a lot of organizations say you need to mark that and use the missing receipt affidavits in Concur. And so then we would get that information in and we start a trigger, right? We go, okay, it's happened once, it's happened twice, it's happened 3 times, happened 4 times. At some point, most organizations have a level where they go, that's no longer appropriate. And so what we would be looking at is basically like doing the counting work for you and then triggering off a response based off. Exactly. So it would say, hey, look, and look, if your policy says, you can't have them, or you can have them up to 5 times, but coach says to you, you always approve it anyway. Maybe you change the SOP document and you just delete that line item, right? And the business is comfortable, right?
But that's available today. That's what I didn't understand as well.
It's available today.
It's the model today.
It's a model today.
Is it a premium model or a regular?
It's a regular model. Yeah. Yeah. And so again, but the action could be different. So eventually you might say, well, I want to reject, or I might want to ask for further information using Slack or Teams. And so what Canal presented this morning was sort of like the roadmap for communication, right? Okay, do you want it on email? Do you want it on Slack? Do you want it on Teams? What level of automation would you want it? Yeah. Good. Any questions? Yeah.
Just kind of going back to what you said about the communication and logic that can be built, like around like supplier questions or things that come in through the AP inbox. Does the when it's integrated with the email system, is it capable of still providing those responses from AppZen as long? Because I use Oracle.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we're in the process of integrating it with Oracle. So if it's processed in AppZen, it uploads or goes over into Oracle, and the communication is back from Oracle to AppZen. As long as that information is contained within AppZen, it will be able to provide those responses if we build like logic around it for payment questions or things like that.
Yeah, so so for example, if it comes into AppZen, we do the extraction on an invoice, we ultimately pass it over to Oracle. We wouldn't know necessarily that it's been paid, right, without having a backwards feed in from Oracle to kind of go, okay, this invoice has been paid, or it's sat with XYZ for additional approval, or whatever that may be. So we'll have this integration work with Oracle or any ERP system or any EMS system effectively. And then based off that, the large language model kind of has the metrics, or the hard facts. Okay, it's been paid, or it's with this person for approval, so that when the query happens, we obviously use regular language like we would, but then we pull in that fact to say, okay, it's been paid, or it's pending payment, yeah, or we're still waiting for your W-9.
Okay. So as long as that information is fed back from Oracle, it is capable.
Correct, yeah. And that's what we do. We have to have that sort of two-way interaction, if you will, so that we can just sort of see the status as it changes. Because what we're effectively doing, if it wasn't AppZen doing that, you would go to Oracle, right? You would log in, you would find the query, you would write it down or put it in an email, and then you would send off the response. We're trying to automate that whole process. And within Inbox, what we're trying to do is kind of present that to you first, to make sure you're comfortable with it. And organizations have asked us already, well, could you automate that so we don't even have to do it? We think that we need to make sure that AI is right. So before we go to that next level, we want to make sure that everyone is comfortable with the response, that it's behaving like it should be. And then, the auditor comes along, looks at it, goes, I'm comfortable, I'll hit send. But the metrics, that comes in from Oracle, so that's always going to be solid. It's more the contextual understanding around it that you might just want to quickly check and go, I'm happy with tonality, I'm happy with what I'm, with what we're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
How long does it take for the models to mature?
That's a great question. So I think, and it's quite a difficult one. I wish I had Canal here. So I think it depends, right? So with transformers and looking for patterns, that type of AI has really got very, very good in a very short period of time. So for those of you that will be familiar with false positives within expense, as we've brought transformer technology in, that's sort of certainly increased the predictability, the accuracy levels for sure. And then large language models, of course, it's really about the data that we're feeding in. So again, as long as we're taking some historic information in, and then using Zen Learn, which is really important, is when we don't get it right and we're not 100% sure, we need people to give us that feedback so that we become 100% sure. And of course, that then becomes a discussion as well, because you need to make sure that people that are teaching the system are teaching it correctly, right? So that there is that human element to it where we need to kind of have those discussions. You know, you might, just because somebody marks it differently once, doesn't necessarily mean you want to have that updated straight away. But that's really where coach comes in, because coach is looking at those actions and tasks, and then based off that, you can say, okay, well, if 95% of the time we're always approving that or we're always rejecting that, then maybe we look to implement that.
Can users prompt or like correct it to behave, like to understand the patterns better?
Well, that's it, yeah, because the coach should be giving you the pattern, but in a, I guess, language that's understandable. So if you look at the report that I think Kunal showed you earlier, which was false positive, there was loads of stats. I mean, that's pretty difficult to follow, right? I mean, the data is there, but it's just hard to consume. So coach is making that information much easier to consume. Okay. So what I would sort of advise everybody, though, if you're interested in understanding how you take that SOP document and you want to see DIY apps and how you're going to be able to build them, our team session, which is after this one, it's just in the room next door, we'll actually cover the screens live and you can actually see them. Okay. So with that, thank you very much. I appreciate it.